contribution you're doing today, it will be recorded, so that you keep that in mind. And I see the recording has started. Wonderful. And I see still a lot of people joining from Copenhagen. Hello, from San Jose, Costa Rica. And great to see. So let's jump right in. My name is Martha Schlönvogt. I'm here together with my colleagues Miyako Nierenkötter and Simone Gotthard, who are working in the background. And you can see we work for the Partnership on Transparency in the Paris Agreement, also known as PATPA. We're hosting today's event, and I can hear an open mic. Maybe you can mute yourself, or maybe Simone, you can check whose mic is open and mute them. Genau, we're from the PATPA, and what the PATPA is that it promotes the implementation of the enhanced transparency framework through capacity development, also through mutual learning exchange formats such as this one today. And as you can see on the slide, we work on several levels, ranging from global activities down to in-country activities, also knowledge products. All of that is on our list. And so to make it quick, let's look at the agenda for today. We're very pleased to see you here. I still see people coming in, so that is very exciting for us. What we're doing here today is we're looking at climate finance tracking. It's a very important topic when it comes to implementing climate action, as well as measuring progress and impact. And we've realized in our work with our partner countries, and maybe you have also realized this in your work, and maybe that's the reason why you're here, that the question has come up more than once, the question being, how can climate tracking actually work? And how can specifically climate finance platforms be developed and implemented successfully? And so that's what we're looking at today in today's session, where we're aiming to provide some food for thought for those who are interested in developing and/or maintaining comprehensive climate finance tracking systems in their own countries. And so for this, we're very fortunate to have the three pillars prepared that you can see there on the slide. So we're starting off with a technical input from our expert Federica Chiappe from Ricardo Energy and Environment, a British consulting firm, who will simply introduce us to the topic of climate finance tracking, and which will also essentially be setting the scene for what is then our second pillar, which is sharing experiences. And what we're doing today is we're going to be sharing experiences with two very, very distinguished country speakers. We're very glad that they're here, which would be Lucía from Costa Rica and Adriana from Colombia, who in a panel discussion will be sharing their experiences on regarding the development and the implementation of climate finance tracking platforms, specifically the two platforms that exist in either of their countries. And then finally, you as participants, and this is what I meant with engagement, will be able to ask your very own questions in a Q&A session that we will be holding towards the end of the event. And again, here you're explicitly and very kindly invited to raise your own questions. So you can raise your hand, you can write in the chat, and we will make sure to moderate any questions that will be coming through the chat throughout the next a little less than 2 hours, to make sure that you find answers that you're looking for. And then last but not least, at the end of our session, we will introduce you to our technical assistants in case that after all of the input that you're receiving today, you may wish to follow up on any aspects heard today in your national context. And so for that, I hand over, and don't want to delay this any further, I hand over to Federica Chiappe. As I mentioned, she's a consultant for the British consulting firm Ricardo Energy and Environment, and who we work with on this topic, together on this topic, and who will be doing this introduction. So very happily, I hand over the mic to Federica.
Thank you so much, Marta. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, and really a big welcome. My name is Federica Chiappe. I'm a contractor with Ricardo to carry out this assignment. By background, I'm a development economist. I've sort of over 14 or so years experience in international climate change policy and finance. I've supported a number of countries across the globe to develop and implement and update NDCs, and also I've been sort of working on a lot of projects to access and mobilize funding at scale. I'm currently team leader for a large UK-funded program called the Climate Finance Accelerator, and I also have the pleasure of working with some of the countries that are represented here, including Colombia. If we can go to the contents. Thank you. So in this presentation, it's probably going to give you very, very broad it's going to cover quite a number of things, but clearly not in as much depth as we would love to in the time that we have available. But I'll sort of start with a quick introduction on climate finance, including some of the trends and geographies of focus. Then plan to go into a bit of an overview of the climate finance tracking, including relevance, entry points, some of the tracking benefits and scope. I'll then dive into some of the methodological approaches that have been followed so far and some international experiences that we have seen sort of across the world to develop and implement some of the tracking systems. And if you follow us tomorrow, we'll also go into a bit of more detail on some of the barriers and enablers that we have identified so far. And also sort of using some of the expertise and comments that we will collect from this phase. Can move to the next one, please. So climate finance, as the word says, refers to finance related to the development and implementation of climate change adaptation and mitigation projects and initiatives. It really refers to both public and private, local, national, transnational, or also blended finance, for example, which is sort of more of a strategic use of public funding to access and mobilize private capital. Clearly, it refers to a number of different types of countries, but with regard to sort of leveraging private finance and broader finance, it is guided by the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. As you all might know, basically means that developed countries and ones that have contributed mostly to climate change should really contribute proportionally more. The previous slide, sorry. So according to the latest available global information, there's been quite a lot of increase in finance flows. The trend is positive, but a lot more needs to be done, in particular in raising funding for sort of developing countries and broadly to meet some of the adaptation goals. Next slide, please.
Someone seems to have taken control, so let me take it back and move forward. Okay, next slide should be visible.
Perfect. So in terms of sort of beneficiary countries, we have seen that, so again, the most updated information shows that there's still sort of a split between public and private funding. The majority of the funding goes to broadly East Asia and the Pacific, followed by the Americas and Central Asia. Sectors are, interestingly, the vast majority of the funding goes in the same countries that it's sourced from. So there is sort of an appearance of strong domestic preference, given that sort of the investment is in these same countries, where there is sort of more of an understanding of the risks and opportunities. Next slide, please. So getting into the sort of the focus of the presentation in terms of the finance tracking. So why climate tracking? I would say that different stakeholders have different entry points. We know that governments are particularly interested in tracking and coding climate finance in their budgets and sort of in their MRV and M&E systems to track MDC implementation. Financiers, for example, are interested in tracking their finance to ensure that it is used for the activities it is meant to. And we have a number of approaches that are being used sort of in the broader financial markets to ensure some consistency between finance flows and tracking. So, for example, the Task Force on Climate related financial disclosure and a number of sort of the OECD tracking systems. There's also an impact management project that really provides a forum for building sort of the global consensus around tracking and reporting impacts. In terms of projects, there's also really the need to track post-issuance reporting, such as, for example, for green bonds. So we know that sort of the funds are used for what they are meant to be used for. In terms of country entry points, really a variety of countries are undergoing sort of finance tracking. For example, in Indonesia, the climate budget tagging for mitigation and adaptation is really sort of underpinning the efforts to issue green bonds and raise capital for it. In Ecuador, very interestingly, the climate finance tracking is evolving to also consider some of the social justice aspects of spending. In Kenya, the tracking of climate finance is mostly for the implementation of Kenya's NDC. Next slide, please. So just a really quick overview of some of the benefits and some of the reasons why sort of tracking climate finance could be beneficial. Broadly, it provides monitoring, evaluation, and reporting benefits. So it increases transparency, accountability, trust. It can inform also some of the international reporting requirements. And some of the requirements to fulfill some of the donor reporting. It also helps sort of the understanding of where sort of the nature and magnitude of domestic and international climate finance. So it really helps in the planning, the budgeting, awareness, and also communication. It can also help in resource mobilization, setting priorities to access and mobilize funding, and it really provides a good overview of where the priorities of the countries are and some of the gaps. So in terms of the scope, what the climate tracking can include is really a number of different dimensions, and it really depends on the priorities of the country. It can sort of target specific sectors, or it can be sort of covering the economy as a whole. In terms of geography, can be national, subnational, or both. In terms of temporal coverage, it could be annual, multi-year, ex ante or ex post, and we'll see some of the methodologies are quite different in this sense. It can cover disbursements or commitments, or again, both. I can also cover both primary and secondary transactions, and some of the key points that some of the tracking systems are looking at are whether it's some of the activities are climate aligned or misaligned, or whether it's finance for transition.
Apologies, someone is sharing their screen. So let's see if we can make this work. Okay, I'm resharing and resume at slide 13. Wonderful, it should be working. Please, to all the participants, please be aware that you don't need to share anything, so don't try, because that will mean that the presentation I'm sharing will be stopped sharing, and you will be sharing something that you may not want to be sharing. So keep an eye on it. Thank you. Sorry, Federica.
No worries. Thanks a lot. Yeah, we can go to the next slide, please. So in terms of methodologies, as you might know, there's a wide variety of methodologies in use. I mentioned that it really has to do with some of the objectives that the country is looking to achieve. There are sort of the climate finance landscapes that are primarily promoted by Climate Policy Initiative, and I think we have the pleasure of having a representative from CPI in the group. They capture really broad dimensions of sort of from flows to instruments and uses, and we'll sort of get to that in a second. They look at both ex ante and ex post flows, and it really captures both public and private. CPRs are climate public expenditure and institutional reviews. They are really a review of expenditures and policies carried out for public funding mostly, and are done sort of an ex post. There's a number of countries that have been working on CPIRs for a number of years, and the original methodology was put together by UNDP. PCIRs are similar to CPIRs, but they really track private finance. So they also track expenditures and policies and ex post, but really focus on private finance. CBT's climate budget tracking, tagging is mainly used to mainstream public finance into the budget and look at the public financial management of it. Is also done ex post. Investment and financial flows are really instead carried out ex ante, and really sort of interesting method to assess some of the sectoral impacts related to NDC implementation. So again, ex ante and used for forecasting. Next slide, please. This is really sort of a snapshot of some of the geographic spread of these methodologies, and you'll see that there's a lot of uses in different parts of the world. I've also seen sort of a number of countries evolve and use a variety of these types of methodologies, evolving in time, starting perhaps from CPIRs and moving more towards sort of more comprehensive public and private reviews. Next slide, please. This is probably a very used and known mapping provided by the Climate Policy Initiative. They've been mapping the landscape of finance for a number of years, both globally and sort of in different countries. The latest landscape is from 2019. You'll see that sort of it shows that the majority of sort of public funding goes from national, bilateral, and multilateral DFIs is committed through concessional and commercial debt and grants, mainly to fund sort of renewable energy, low carbon transport, and some adaptation. It also tracks the private funding from corporates and households, which really mostly is done through corporate balance sheets, and also primarily targets mitigation projects. And this is really another snapshot of the OECD real markers that have been used for a number of years. The sort of the real markers are provide a good indication of to some countries. There's quite a detailed methodology in some of the documents. This is a sort of a decision tree, which I think is something that a number of countries really face. So trying to understand whether an activity is climate relevant, how much of it is related to climate, and distinguishing from relevance to significant climate relevance, and also whether climate change is the principal objective of an activity. we can definitely get into a bit more of that in some of the questions, perhaps. The World Bank very usefully recently developed a review of the climate tagging used worldwide. They indicated that there are two distinct approaches to the definition of climate relevant activities and expenditures. There's objective-based definitions that broadly distinguish climate relevant activities on the basis of their intended impact and mostly follow the OECD real markers. Some of the countries really focus on the definitions in the real markers, or there's policy-based definitions, which really limit the climate relevant activities to those that are sort of specifically referenced in national climate change policy documents. We also find sort of a combination of these two different approaches in some of the countries. Another example is sort of South Africa. South Africa is quite advanced in developing green finance taxonomy. The taxonomy has been in consultation for a while. They gathered a lot of inputs from different experts, and now they have a sort of really good definition and taxonomy on what constitutes green finance in the country. And this is a snapshot. Just really also a snapshot on the climate change financing framework that it has been developed in Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, which is really a climate finance framework. It allows for the integration of climate actions and policies in the provincial public financial management system. I think this is my final slide. I think that the next one is really provides an overview of some of the resources that I've touched upon in this presentation. Hopefully they'll be useful to provide a bit of a mapping of some of the methodologies and approaches. And yeah, very happy to hand back to Marta and the team. And yeah, and thank you so much. We can go into more detail on how these are applied in the different countries.
Thank you very much, Federica. And I want to point out to the participants that the slides will be shared following this event. So any resources that you see here, you don't have to frantically copy the URL or anything. You will be getting access to all of the materials used in this event. So you can consult the slides after the event in all ease. So thank you very much, Federica, and we will be jumping into our next pillar, the second one, if you remember, the panel discussion. And for that, I'm very happy and very grateful to be able to introduce you to our two speakers. I do want to encourage you, nonetheless, that we're not doing a Q&A session right now, as it will be after the panel discussion. If you already have any sort of questions that are appearing that you can write them in the chat, or you can also write them down and then raise your hand later on in the Q&A and raise your questions there. And so without any further ado, I will introduce you to our two speakers. So first we have Lucía Moya Mora from Costa Rica. She is an international consultant specializing in climate change transparency, and she's currently an advisor of the Climate Change Directory of the Ministry of Environment and Energy. And I see our speakers have turned their cameras on. Wonderful. Ana Lucía also is the coordinator of the CBIT project of Costa Rica, and she is the one leading the team that is implementing Costa Rica's climate tracking platform. And someone changed my view here, so I can't see my text anymore. But she's the leader for the climate change platform that she's going to be presenting and that we're going to be talking about today. And then we also have Adriana, and I know I have to look at my backup script for the brief description because I have not memorized it. Apologies. So we have Adriana. She's the leader for methodology and traceability of the MRV and climate finance platform in Colombia. So the other platform that we will be looking at today, and she works for the National Planning Department in Colombia. She's an agronomist engineer with a specialization in sustainable food agribusiness and is also currently pursuing a master's degree in climate change. And her professional experience includes supporting and coordinating public programs in Chile and Colombia and working with the financial sector in relation to the agricultural sector. And so with that, I'm very happy to give the floor. We will do the following. First, our two speakers will give a very short few-minute introduction to the two platforms so that we all know about them if we have never heard of them before. And then we will start the panel discussion, which will be led by Federica. So I will stop sharing my screen and I will allow for Ana Lucía to start her presentation of the platform.
Thank you very much, Martha. I'm going to share my screen and let me know if it is working.
Yes, we can see it. Now you may have to activate the presentation mode so we can see it on full screen.
Okay, so perfect. Thank you very much for this space. I'm going to be very brief in order to be able to save time for the discussions. I'm going to be using 5 key questions of why Costa Rica has pursued a process in order to be able to do climate tracking, climate finance monitoring. So first, I'm going to briefly introduce to you the CINAMEC, that is the Climate Change National Metric System. That is basically a platform that Costa Rica has developed for more than 5 years in order to be able to improve how Costa Rica is reporting on transparency matters related to climate change. And we are working designing this platform to be able to Costa Rica comply with the enhanced transparency framework of the Paris Agreement. So as you can see in the screen, the platform has a mitigation area and also an adaptation area and also a climate finance area. We're focusing on this first stage of the development, particularly on support received, which I'm going to briefly talk a little bit more in the next slides. And for those who might not know CINAMEC yet, CINAMEC is basically a platform that supports the digitalization and making more efficient these processes that includes the capture part of the data, the processing of the data, reporting data, and also a platform, an open data platform in order to share and visualize this information. So we have, particularly on the climate finance part, we have been working since 2018, and it has been an ongoing work, and we have had several stakeholders, but the ones you see on the slide are the main ones. The Plan, that is the Ministry of Planning, then SUHEF, that is the head of the finance. What is the I'm sorry, I'm having trouble translating, but it's basically the supervisor of the banks. And then the Ministry of Treasury, that also it's supporting particularly the public finance part. And this has been led by the Ministry of Environment that has been gathering all these stakeholders in order to be able to start doing this climate tracking monitoring. Then what have we done? So I think this is probably the most interesting slide. At the beginning, we started with the idea of doing climate finance monitoring on these three areas: the private, public, and international cooperation. And then we realized very early in the process that for us, doing the climate finance monitoring on the public part was very tricky, um, because we had to make some previous changes on the way the national budget worked. And very early we said, okay, this is going to definitely take time. So let's focus on the other two that we have a clear path on where and what need to be done. So we have been, and probably on the questions I'm going to be more talking about what we are doing on the private monitoring. That is basically the banking transactions and other financial operations, and also international cooperation. That is basically non-refundable finance received. And first we developed a taxonomy. Then we also developed climate finance trackers, markers for adaptation and also for mitigation and for both. And we developed some guidelines in order to be able to support the different ministries that had to implement these markers. And then right now we are on the last two steps. We are doing capacity building that is crucial in order to be able to sustain this within time, because it's a lot of people that have to coordinate at the same time and that need to understand what they are doing and to understand the concepts to be able to gather good data. And then we are doing linkages between the different systems in order to be able to receive data. So that's very brief, and I hope it had worked as a introduction for the discussion that we're going to have. Okay, and just let me unshare my screen. Did I already unshare my screen?
Yes, I think
Okay.
Adriana is already in the process of uploading her slides.
Great.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Ana Lucia, for that brief introduction that will serve as the basis. And yes, I can see, Adriana, your slides, so I will just hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm also going to do a short introduction, and also I will follow the way that Ana Lucia did in giving the answer to the 5 questions. So the 5 facts on the MRB platform for climate finance tracking in Colombia. The first one is why. Why did we develop this platform or this system? So first of all, of course, we have the Paris Agreement ratification and the NDC commitments. Even though, well, we like to say and to get clear that the MRB scope is wider, because we are not just tracking the projects that are specifically related with the NDC, but also the ones that are associated in any way. And I will talk about this later, of course. And in the national level, it was important for us to having a tool for informed decisions making. And this is for all the sectors, as well as private and the public sector, and also the investors who wants to know how the flows in the climate sector are being invested. The second is who is doing this, and for us is the National Planning Department, which is the DMP in Spanish, because there is a frame who is called CISCLIMA, and it is the entity who coordinates all the interinstitutional efforts in the way of going to low carbon and resilient development. So the DMP, the National Planning Department, is the technical secretary of one of the CISCLIMA committees, which is called the Finance Management Committee. And in this committee, there are different actors from the public and private sectors. For instance, in the private sectors, we have the commercial and the developing bank. And this has helped us to track resources from those sources. Yeah. And the third is when, well, we have been developed this system into 2 stages. The first one, it began on the 2015 to the 2017, and what was done there was the developing of the methodological guide, the taxonomy, and the platform construction. And the platform construction was launched on the end of 2017. And currently, we are working in the second stage, which comes from 2019. And what we are doing right now is an updating of the platform and the methodology. And also we have been working so hardly on a process of dissemination and ownership process, yeah, with a lot of stakeholders in order to get the sustainability and the use for to the system. Fourth is what, and we really like to call the MRV platform like a conjunction of processes. It is not the platform. It is not. It is a mean, not the end. So this involves a lot of processes that involves people and informatic tools for tracking and reporting climate finances. And the data that it is included in the platform, it comes from both national and international public resources. And also we are working with private sources, and of course when the information is available. For instance, in the private sector, we are working just with the industrial sector, because that's what it is available, and it is being continually available. Yeah. And how we do it? Well, we use existing databases, and we apply the methodological guide that we have developed, as I told you, in the first stage. And then once that we have identified the projects that are related with climate change, we classify them, and we have identified 12 sectors, 31 subsectors, and climate objectives, which are mitigation, adaptation, or cross-cutting. This is just for showing you how our taxonomy looks. As I told you, we have 12 sectors and 35 subsectors, which contain also 248 actions. But this is just to have an idea of what kind of projects can be related with climate change. And just for give you a look of how the platform looks, this is the one we are working right now. This is under construction, and this is going to be available, we hope, in 1 or 2 months for the public consultation. So that's it. And yeah, I hope it gave you a wide look about the MRV from Colombia. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana and Ana Lucia. And with this, we are ready to jump into the panel discussion. So I will hand over to Federica, who will be facilitating the discussion. And anyone who has questions, you're again free to write them in the chat. You can also we will be very happy if you can turn on your cameras if you want to engage with a visual. And yes, with that, let's start. Federica, Adriana, Ana Lucia, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, really, really insightful presentation. Thank you, Ana Lucia and Adriana. So I think sort of I captured some of the really interesting insights. Perhaps I'll sort of start with Ana Lucía. If we can maybe start with a little bit more information on the taxonomy and the methodologies. So some indication of whether you would recommend using internationally recognized methodologies, and yeah, sort of recommendations on how you started and what sort of the methodology that was used, any reference to international methodologies. I was also really sort of interested in your point and the specific on some of the challenges that you were facing in tracking also the public side of things, and yeah, complications with including the sort of needing to potentially change the way in which the budget is carried out in the country. So just really a quick question on would you recommend using international methodologies, and whether that sort of was conflicting or not with how you carry out tracking as a country.
Thank you, Federica. Okay, I think that's a very good question for starting, because I think definitely a taxonomy is a good way of starting to think around this. And it's not an easy first step. Because the taxonomy definitely will define the rest of how you do climate finance tracking on the country. So it's definitely a critical step, and the methodologies and what you choose as a framework for starting is critical. So when we started thinking on this, our base was definitely the Rio markers. And I think they're very good starting point. They are very useful framework, particularly because it's a framework that a lot of countries use as base too, and it provides us a easy to follow perspective and an easy framework to start. But I think something that also was quite important for us, not just use the real markers as there is, as they are, but to actually adapt it to the national context. So maybe just going to share, just so you can look at it. This is the taxonomy that we have developed. It's definitely in Spanish, but but basically it follows also what Adriana mentioned, that it has a team, a sub-team, and then actions are related, and then if it is mainly related to mitigation, adaptation, or both. And the idea is that the different projects or finance operations can pick where the team, sub-team, and if they are related mainly to mitigation or adaptation, because we know that the people that are going to be doing this classification maybe are not climate change experts, and they need some guidance in order to be able to understand if the projects they are classifying is actually climate related or not. And this taking this into the national context was very useful for Costa Rica, because, for example, in our context, projects related to transitioning the vehicle fleet to one that works with gas, with methane gas. In some contexts, that might be considered a climate action, but in Costa Rica, that's not a climate action we're focusing on. So that's an example of one activity that might be climate related in some context, but it's not in our context. And this taxonomy that I just briefly show you has been improved through several versions. This is the last one that we developed in July. Basically, we refined it, and I'm very sure that it's not close. Every time that I open it again and start looking, I think maybe this needs to be improved. But I think something that is also a good insight to share from my side is that you need something to put on the table and then to start, because it's never going to be perfect. And from yeah, and related to the barriers that we have faced, definitely there's a lot of different expertises that need to be included on this kind of work and analysis. And my main expertise is climate change. So for me, this other world of finance is totally new, and we have to work along with other experts that their main expertise is finance. So how you bring together these two words is definitely an important challenge, particularly because we're working with the Ministry of Finance, we're working with the Ministry of Planning, that their expertise is in a different field. So how you bridge this different knowledges and take advantage of it is something that needs to be taken into account, and yeah, that's something that has definitely taken a lot of our time to build in these capacities among the several stakeholders in order to be able to keep having these conversations and to go deeper on those. And as you mentioned, with the budget, we had we tried to implement a CPAR. Now the letters are confusing to me, and we tried the exercise. I think it was a very interesting one, but what we quickly realized is that the budget we have is based on activities. So on expenditures activities. So what you have is salaries, payment of paper, and is what you expending more than what that is being used for. So that's also, so that started a whole different conversation and a whole different framework of analysis on how we need to improve the national budget in order to be able to show us better what results are coming from the public investment. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there.
Thanks so much, Ana Lucia. This is really, really helpful. And I think you touched on some of the questions that I wanted to pose later on, some of the barriers and challenges that you faced. Adriana, do you want to give a bit of an overview of whether you recommend sort of using international recognized methodologies, or is it more a matter of developing your own methodology, or a combination of both?
Yeah, well, what we have in Colombia is also a combination of both. I mean, the international methodology are good for as a baseline, where you can step on. But I agree with Ana Lucia, but because you need to make it to ownership that methodology, because everything depends on the national context. So this is what we have in Colombia. We also, for this methodology construction and this taxonomy construction, we had the support of the WRE and the GEC flag, but I don't know how to translate it in English, but it is like, yeah, the Caribbean and Latin America group, finances group, climate finances group, sorry. So yeah, this is what we did. And also it was important for us that we have the supporting of another ministries, for instance. It was a consulting process that helped us to make a taxonomy for us. And it is important as well, it is really key to know that this is not this is a dynamic process. For as I told you, in the current stage that we are running right now, we are doing a methodology updating, and it also includes the review. We have been reviewing the new taxonomies, the new, for instance, the European Union taxonomy and the CPI taxonomy, and we are getting of them some of the issues that we didn't consider it in the first edition, let's say. So yeah, for us and from our experience, it is important to have both. And with the real markers, for instance, if you would like to apply the real markers just as they are, you will have to go really deep into every project. And as Ana Lucia said, you sometimes just have the name, and that's all. And if you would like, maybe there are systems that would allow you to have more information and go deeply on the objectives of the projects, but you will need more human resources, of course, more time. So what we do is that we track the activities and the projects, the action that are associated with climate change, even though it does not say in the name of the project that it is related with adaptation or mitigation or cross-cutting. So yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you so much. There's so much interesting content. I think sort of my key takeaways, I would say, is to start with some internationally recognized methodology and really contextualize them. Really interesting, some of the points you mentioned around ensuring that it is a dynamic process, that there is sort of sufficient consultation, and also ensuring ownership. And I think sort of on the ownership question, perhaps we can touch on some of the points, like starting from some of the points you mentioned with that stakeholder mapping that you both sort of presented. And it would be really interesting to understand in the specific what stakeholders must be engaged, in what capacity, and how to ensure to maintain their involvement. I think you both mentioned the sort of Ministry of Planning as a key component, but also a number of others. So yeah, Adriana, should we start with you this time, if that's okay? So yeah, what stakeholders must be engaged and how to ensure that they are sustained across the process?
Yeah, for sure. Well, for us, it was really important to work with the environmental ministry as one of them, but also, as I mentioned already, there are a legal frame, normative frame, and there is this committee that I mentioned, where our different actors are participating. For instance, we have the banks there, the developing bank, and also the commercial bank, and also another sectors like the industry and other ministries. So yeah, I think those are important. But by now, what I are doing is that we have been really making a huge effort on dissemination and looking for some actors that that could be interested on what the MRV system has. And for instance, it has been important for us to go close to the academy. It has been really interesting, and also with the regional planning areas, because this helps them to get the baseline for construct on it their planning projects for the territorial level. So yeah, actually there are a lot of stakeholders that can be involved, and as much stakeholders knowing about the MRV system, the merrier,
Thank you so much, Adriana. Over to you, Ana Lucía. Do you have you had this similar approach to engaging stakeholders? Have you found sort of similar challenges as Adriana, or do you have anything sort of different, any different observations, for example, from engaging stakeholders, what stakeholders to engage and how to perhaps keep the engagement throughout the process?
Okay. So I don't know if it is the case in many of the countries, but at least in Costa Rica, this started as a challenge because, as I mentioned, this process is inserted within the development of the climate change metric system. And what we have been working was mainly on the mitigation and adaptation part. So it was basically on analyzing the impacts and the actions taken by the country in regards to mitigation and adaptation. And then we had climate finance. And from the very beginning, there was a challenge because the stakeholders that we were with whom we were working on mitigation and adaptation were totally different from climate finance. So it was definitely a process to start from zero. And the first thing that I think is useful is to define the scope. Because as Federica mentioned in her presentation, climate finance can be huge. And maybe if you define which part of climate finance you would like to start with, or if maybe it's everything, the stakeholders might change. In our case, I think that has been interesting because we have focused when we were, for example, when we were working with the public part, we focused on different stakeholders, and we were working with the private part, we're working with different stakeholders and so on. But I think probably, of course, the name of the institutions change regarding to country, but definitely there's usually an institution that supervises the banks. That's always an useful institution. That there's an institution that usually supervises the income money from other countries, and this is regarding, in our case, international cooperation, that in our case is the Minister of Planning. That has been super useful because also takes into account their relation with the other development areas of the country. And there's also the institution that takes account the bonds and the insurance. Insurance is something that we haven't worked so far right now very deeply, but we're starting to advance faster in this, and that's also a very useful institution to have. And at the beginning, we start working with them separately, but I think more organically than actually planned. They were all kind of having the same. We were all having the same conversation, but with different tables. So right now, what is being organized is a table, an intersectoral table that works with basically these stakeholders that I mentioned, in a way that we can advance together and we can coordinate methodologies and we can coordinate decisions together with the stakeholders. And also that, as Adriana mentioned, has been very useful because it's not just the Minister of Environment pushing, but it's them having a table discussing and taking decisions in order to be able to also show what they're doing on climate finance. That I think, at least in Costa Rica, that's very that's an interesting purpose, not only for the Minister of Planning, but for the rest of the stakeholders. It's also nice to have and nice to show that they're working on climate change.
Thank you so much for your really detailed answers. I think if sort of perhaps a couple of things that struck me are sort of firstly the real key involvement of the Ministry of Planning and Ministry of Environment, and secondly expanding this consultative group to really a wide variety of stakeholders. Interestingly, the more expertise on MRV, the better. So Third, really opening up to stakeholders that sometimes are not as involved in climate change activities as one would expect, and such as banks, the supervisory institutions on banks, and insurance, because they all kind of play a really fundamental role, and really also starting to understand how one and the other works. And I think understanding how the stakeholders work and what they're interested in can lead to some, really sustainable benefits for the system. So thank you so much. Perhaps the next question that we can touch on is a bit more on the financing. It would be really interesting to understand from your perspective, and perhaps we can start with Adriana. How is sort of your system and the platform being financed? Have you had any sort of challenges in accessing finance and in sustaining that finance from your perspective?
Okay, yeah, the finance of the platform is a challenge for us because the budget for environmental issues in our country is reduced, well, every ministry says the same. But in our case, the platform has been financed by the international cooperation, mostly with non-refundable finance aids. At the beginning, well, we had a readiness program resources, and as I told you, we had the support of WRE and the Latin American and Caribbean Climate Finances Group and others. And right now, in this moment, this is the stage we are working currently, is being financed by the Development French Agency. And this is, as long as we know until now, is going to finish on December. So we are already looking for more resources, and in order to continue this work, because it's been really interesting what we have got, the goals we have already achieved, and there is still some work to do. We have, for instance, in this stage, we were able to track the resources from the National Bank Development, and this is new. This is important for us, but there is still so many things to do. So yeah, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. So it is something we really need to work in order to guarantee the sustainability of the system. Because as you said, when I showed the two stages, there were like 2 years without working on this, and then when we came back, then we needed to update the platform and the tracking for those years where there were not resources budget for the MRB sustainable. So yeah, it's a challenge, but anyhow, we're working on it.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I can definitely imagine. Ana Lucia, any thoughts from your perspective on funding, how it's been funded, and any perspective on how you sort of intend to fund your work going forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think our case is very similar to Colombia's. We have since the beginning, this project started with international cooperation funds, and the finance part particularly has been heavily supported by GIZ. The first, and with this, it considers also the development of the methodologies itself, and also the platform. So we have had support from GIZ, and then we right now also have support from UNDP. But it's definitely a challenge. The way we work is that while we're implementing a project, we are writing the next project in order to be able to sustain the work we're doing. So it takes a lot of time, this also hunting for projects in order to be able to sustain the work we're doing. And we are also trying to include some of the finance in the institutions that are going, I mean, some of the money required to be able to sustain within time on the institutions that are going to be able to have to use the system. And for example, the plan that has a part of the system already owns and maintains its system that is the project that is the system that gathers all the information on international cooperation, and that was before we started. I mean, it's not. So they had the system before we actually start poking them in order to be able to also include climate change. So that's definitely something that is already working. And what we are doing is we're trying to include on the budgets of the different ministries the maintaining of the platforms. But it's a challenge in itself because, as Adriana mentioned, the budgets are constantly being reduced, and the budgets related to tools, to online tools, are always also hard to keep. So yes.
Okay, thank you so much. So as probably a really quick summary, you've sort of benefited from a variety of sort of development finance from a number of partners, from WRI, GIZ, UNDP, and so on, to get to this point. Sustaining the finance for this is definitely a bit of a challenge, in particular because of the sort of the difficulty in creating a commercial benefit of the tracking system, and sort of also using existing platforms can help to share some of the costs and activities. Maybe that's probably a good tip for other countries. Great. I think sort of perhaps the next question is around, do you think sort of compared to when you started, where you are now, is your platform and sort of broader system fulfilling the objectives that you had planned for at the start, and sort of any benefits that you have seen from it? So sort of compared to your objectives, is it sort of fulfilling these objectives, and are you broadly happy with the progress and the work? Ana Lucia, do you want to start this one?
Yes, thank you. I think it's an interesting question because in projects like this, I think you never have a final product. The product is always under construction, and where you're achieving is definitely getting closer to your final goal. But the final goal, I think, always moves because this climate change world is always changing, and also the bar is always going higher. So definitely what we have right now is useful, and it already creates value. It adds value to the country and adds value to decision makers in order to be able to have information to be used to better better analyze what is happening on the country. But regarding climate finance particularly, I think we're just babies. We're just starting to actually pass from the methodologies that we have developed to implement it, and then to sustain within time the implementation in order to be able to have actual data to do the analysis that we want. And the analysis that we want go from the reporting to the UNFCCC. The BTRs particularly are the ones that we are working towards, but also to have data to analyze nationally which areas are receiving more funding, which areas do we need to actually improve the strategy to capture more finance, and which areas maybe are receiving more finance that the results they are getting. So that's the final goal. And considering that, I think we still have a lot of work ahead. But I am very happy that we're actually taking the steps in order to be able to get there. That is not easy. It has been a huge challenge, but I think we started already, and that's something.
This is really, really helpful. Thank you so much, Ana Lucia. Adriana, over to you. Perhaps some sort of where you are in the process and whether where you are now sort of fulfills your original objectives, or sort of you're seeing a lot of barriers and challenges.
Okay, yeah, I think that Ana Lucia said it perfectly. This is dynamic and the barrier is always moving forward. So it is difficult to say that we already achieved our goals, but we are on the way. So first, the platform itself is helping some of the objectives, like having the information in one side, which helps to consolidate the reports and also to improving the efficiency of the investments, and also to make better and informed decisions. So at least it is something, it is our baseline, but in some examples that we would like to share with you, of course, it is the construction of the biannual updating reports that we are working right now in the third of them. And now we are already looking as well to the BDR. So these are some. Also, in this process of dissemination of the information and what the MRB is, we found a university, for instance, that they were doing some researches about the sentencing, and this is, a legal issue about the cleaning of the Bogota River. And it was so nice for us when that teacher said, well, this is really helpful for us because this is going to help us to make a following about the investments according with that sentence. So yeah, it's something like you say, well, nice. It is really, it glads you when you see that's what you're doing. It is really being useful for a lot of people, and this is why it is really key, the work on the dissemination, because you can have the perfect platform and completely updated, but if anyone is using it, so it does not worth it. And also we have been working on some metrics on the platform using, for instance, from the 2020 to 2021, the use and the time that people are spending in the platform has been duplicated. So it is really cool for us, and we have more than 500 users of the platform. So yeah, this give us the message that we are doing good. Well, this is about like the examples, and about the difficulties that we have had. Of course, the financial supporting, as we already mentioned, but also in some cases, the modern databases are not with the enough information for us to make the track and to do it consistently year after year. So we have been working on making some procedures that can allow us and make it easier to replicate the exercise year after year. You know, if the next year it is not me or something of their current team working on the tracking, so they will be able to reply the exercise and try to make it like the same and unifying the process. For instance, as Ana Lucía also mentioned, when you are looking to the modern databases, for instance, from the public resources or public budgets, you just find the title of the project. But now here in Colombia, there is a huge project of using some markers on every project. So this maybe, hopefully, would make easy the task of doing the tracking, but it is still something that it's not already finished. And I would like also to mention something else here, and this is that talking about the sustainability of the system, it is needed to develop tools that automate the process. And for instance, we have had the chance to work with the digital unit here at the DMP in order to develop an algorithm that it is already being proved, and it is able to track and to identify some of the projects that can be related with climate change. Of course, it still needs the human review, but it is already something. You know, you don't have to check 5,000 projects, but just 500 or something like this. So it is really, really helpful for us. And yeah, this is like a methodological goal that we have been working on.
Really, many thanks. Really, so many really useful inputs, I think, for a number of participants. I think sort of what really caught me was probably the first point is, you know, you have to start from somewhere and you might not know where you'll end up, and these systems take quite a long time to get started and to continue to be built. I think really interesting the mention on how to help to automatize the process, and what Ana Lucía mentioned about some of the stats that were captured so far. I think that's going to be really, really useful to show the impact of what you're doing, and some of the benefits and really the use of the platform itself, and some of the sort of importance on is not lost from one user to the other, and some sort of really important points on dissemination. And I think sort of the importance of disseminating these benefits in time, and that can really help to strengthen some of the use of the platform itself. Also capture some interesting points around potential next steps and things that you would like to expand on. So more finance, more sources, and really ensure that the platforms are more comprehensive. And I think this this point really links well with probably the last question that I have, which is around that adaptability and dynamism. You've really mentioned quite a number of points, but I think if you could maybe explain a bit more about how to ensure that the platform sort of incorporates and keeps up with some of the changes required in need, and sort of how the platform allows for that dynamic interaction. So any suggestions on how to basically make the platform dynamic and inclusive from your perspective? Adriana, do you want to start this time?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it is really, as we have said, among all the whole conversation, it is really key to know that this is not a process that finished in some point. You know, it is key, really key, to from the beginning knowing that this is dynamic, and this goes about all the processes, from the methodology, from the taxonomy. If you want to construct a platform, in the reports that you maybe are considering, if you are considering also to make some indicators, the dynamic quality, it has to be everywhere. So for instance, for us, we have, as I told you, 12 sectors. But now in the last review that we were working on, we just knew that we were not considering the ITC sector, for instance. So it will mean to reorganize some of the actions that we are already considering and adding new ones. So this is already something. And also the platform. The platform, it has to be as as flexible as possible. Because if you want to add new sectors, for taking the same example, you will the platform, it needs to be able to let you make the change. And also it is important because we were already talking and we agreed on the financial issue, you know. So maybe you will have an systems engineer just once, and he will let the platform functional. But then if you will need change to be made later, then you will have in trouble. So this is important. For instance, you need to go to the details, because if you need, this is made already by humans, like Ana Lucía and I don't know who else in the public, but you can make some mistakes, and if you want to edit that single project, and the system has been not constructed considering that human quality, then you will have a trouble. So you can go as in the level, in the detail level as you can, and you will have to think how you will handle it. Also, it is important to take and to work with people. I mean, that your team, it is with different disciplines. Because as Ana Lucía said, not all the people who is working on these tracking systems are experts in climate change. Maybe you will handle some of them, but maybe you will not. You know, maybe I know something about agronomist, but I will not know anything about industry. So it is really important to have that in order to avoid the mistakes and the further needed to make some changes in the platform. So, but yeah, it really needs to be flexible. Really, it is so.
Thank you very much, Adriana. Maybe